This is an iteration of a video that I have wanted to make for quite some time on the channel, but I wasn't sure about the framing. I wasn't sure exactly how to really get this done, how to really talk about this, because dark academia is a concept that I think is not at all organized and is relatively loosely even conceptualized. It is sort of mimetic in nature. It is comparable to the hustle culture meme. It is comparable to the Sigma male meme. But I think that it is something that is worth looking at, worth possibly pursuing. Something that, frankly, what I have here is a 20-page document of things that I have compiled together that I want to go through in this video. And along the course of this compilation, I've realized that largely what dark academia means is dichotomous. On one hand, there is the aesthetic, which is fashion, the aesthetic, which is visual. I think that what I'm talking about in particular is sort of even counter to that, is sort of different completely than that. Because I think that that is sort of tertiary to the other sort of lane of dark academia. If you put in dark academia, search it on YouTube, largely what comes up are playlists of music. This is much more in line with what I want to talk about and highlight here, because I think that what that is more in line with, hey, I'm going to plug in earbuds as I get to work. In a way, I think that this is emblematic of the mimetic nature, because mimetic nature has really sprung to life in the human consciousness with the advent of the internet and people kind of always having to have an earbud in. People always, this grind culture, this hustle culture, grind bro, hustle bro culture, are cultures which revolve around work. And work is not particularly social. And the dark academia work, I think, is kind of antisocial. And in this way, this channel really, I started this channel in 2015. We will see 2015 mentioned later in this video, but what it was started as was this channel started as a way to discuss the academic away from academia. I think that is very much in line with what dark academia is as well. The darkness of dark academia is not simply something to view. This is not, in my opinion, just fashion, for example. So, what are we talking about with this here? What is dark academia? And one of the things that I have to mention explicitly is that this is the first academic, artistic, literary movement, loosely defined, that I know of that leans so heavily on previous texts, on previous art, on previous aesthetics, and I think, as we will get into a little bit later, previous ascetics. And the first movement that way since, in my opinion, classicism, neoclassicism, however you want to define that, where we are looking at largely, mostly, something previous, something prior to. And I think that the soul of this movement, the alluring part of this movement, of the idea of the dark academe, is the fantasy of disappearing and embarking on a deep intellectual and personal pursuit only to reemerge as a new person. That is, I think, what is core to the dark academic ethos, I guess I should say. There are two ideas that spring up from this idea of the sort of cocooning in academic pursuits to reemerge. One is something that I don't think we really necessarily recognize even in today's world. And that is the idea of seasonality. So much of our culture today is anti-seasonality. You think about your work. Probably your work does not change whether it's January, whether it's June, whether it's August, whether it's October. You wake up, you go to your 9 to 5, and it's pretty much the same thing. This is not in tune with nature. Obviously, nature is very highly seasonal, but it's not in tune with the way that culture evolved, with the way that work ethic evolved in our own species. So one of the things that I think about a lot, and I think about this a lot because I work overnights, I am a true dark academic, don't you know, is that they say that people used to sleep upwards of 10 or 11 hours during the winter months. Part of this was because it was dark longer, and prior to electricity, I mean, you could do something about this with candles, etc., work in the dark, etc., work while it's dark, not work in the dark, but you could do that to a limited degree. With the advent of electricity, however, it's not just the evening hours, as exemplified by my own work schedule, it's the overnight hours that become fully comprehensible work hours, business hours, and we lose a lot of seasonality because of that. We lose a lot of seasonality with the fact that nothing has to change all that particularly in our modern industrialized world by the fact that it is, during certain parts of the year, negative 20 degrees outside here in Kansas City, or it is 105 degrees outside here in Kansas City, or wherever it is that you live as well. We have ways of changing not necessarily the environment, but you change the expectation based on what is available at that time. So if you can work, you are expected at work. If you can do business, you are expected at business. Previous times, if you were even, for example, a retailer in the mid 1800s, for example, and there was a snowstorm outside, no one was going to be coming by your store because they couldn't get there. So you wouldn't be expected to get there, right? So we have done away with a lot of seasonality in today's world, and this dark academic ethos is highly, in my opinion, revolved around the idea of seasonality, the idea of cocooning, reinvention, and reemergence. There is also in this idea a danger, the very large danger, and we will explore this with some of the end of this video will be full of ideas that I think are maybe not core to dark academia, but certainly could be. Texts that are not core to dark academia, but certainly could be. Mimetic ideas that are not core to dark academia, but could be. The big danger to this mindset of the dark chapter that leads to reemergence is that reemergence never comes. Partially due to another idea that we kind of ignore in today's world, and that is the idea of addiction. can you become addicted to not a drug, not a thing, but a mindset? And I think that yes, absolutely you can. So for myself, I don't mean to make anything about me, but this is the story that I can verbalize to share about this. I work overnights for a reason. Now, in 2017, I felt myself sort of stagnating, and I don't like to stagnate. And what I did was there was an opening where I work on an overnight shift, and sort of I Jedi mind tricked my boss into giving me more money to take that role. But in the back of my mind, one of the things that was at play there was the fact that one of the worst eras of my life was immediately after high school. In a mad attempt to make money to be able to go to college, I took an overnight position, and it absolutely wrecked me. And I took a couple things from that, but I said, look, at this stage of my life where I felt that stagnation was coming on, I said, I can do this awful shift. And it is a truly awful shift if you have not worked overnights. And use that as a time period to reinvent a little bit. And I have become addicted to the attempt at reinvention. I think that is alive and well inside the dark academia mindset. It is possible to become addicted to that thing which is supposed to be seasonal and never to reemerge. So that's one thing I want to talk about here. And I think that if this were to possibly blossom into something that was a more official movement or intellectual revolution or a more robust mimetic thing, adopting a moniker, something like Darkademics, which I've never heard anywhere. To the best of my knowledge, I just made that up. Perhaps that is out there in the ether somewhere, but to the best of my knowledge, I made that up. But something like this would be, in my opinion, very powerful for a movement like that. Now, I do have to, I guess, perhaps admit something here. This video will be leaning very heavily on two sources. Number one, ironically. Number two, I think perhaps, possibly, prophetically, not on my own behalf, but because I think, okay, I'll just get into it. One is Wikipedia. Now, I understand, I know, don't click away just yet. Wikipedia is a very tainted source, but it is a source. It is a resource for some things to provide a jumping off point. Number two, which will also tempt some people to click away, is ChatGPT. Now, why do I say that this part of things could be prophetic? I think it is also within the confines of what would be considered dark academia to lean very heavily on AI, not necessarily for generation, but for resourcing. Because if there is any real Frankenstein's monster of today, guys, I think it's AI. And I will discuss a little bit later why I think Frankenstein would be a seminal text for the dark academic movement. And I think possibly, probably, this is something that is, if you think about it for a couple seconds, very obvious. But Wikipedia, for reasons which will be proven, I think, ironic a little bit later, is bastardized. And it is ironic to use Wikipedia as a resource here, but I think it will be useful. And this is how Wikipedia runs through what is dark academia. Dark academia is a literary aesthetic See, just says aesthetic here. And subculture concerned with higher education, the arts, and literature, or an idealized version thereof. I think this is slightly off, but we will discuss that as this video goes on. The aesthetic centers on traditional educational clothing, interior design, activities such as writing, poetry, ancient art, and classic literature, as well as classical Greek and collegiate Gothic architecture. The trend emerged on the social media site Tumblr in 2015, the same year this channel was launched, before being popularized by adolescents and young adults in the late 2010s and early 2020s, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is something very telling, in my opinion. It has been during the last 5 years that this has really emerged online. And think about that. What was that era? The COVID-19 pandemic era. It was a point in time where we were all forced inside. That is the cocooning of the individual, cut off from the world. This would have been a perfect time for someone who was pursuing such ideas and ideals. Aesthetic. Collegiate Gothic architecture is a popular theme within the aesthetic. The fashion of the 1930s and 1940s features prominently in the dark academic aesthetic, particularly clothing associated with attendance at Oxbridge Ivy League schools and prep schools of the period. It would be so fantastic, in my opinion, because some of this will get into Sigma culture if we're not careful here. That the bohemian sort of fashion ideals were to reemerge through dark academia. I think that would be, I think that fits much better than Oxbridge Ivy League school, prep school type stuff. A number of the articles of clothing must be associated with the aesthetic are cardigans, blazers, dress shirts, plaid skirts, Oxford shoes, and clothing made of houndstooth and tweed. Its color palette consisting mainly of black, white, beige, browns, dark green, and occasionally navy blue. The subculture draws on idealized aesthetics of higher education and academia, often with books and libraries featuring prominently. Activities such as calligraphy, museum visits, libraries, coffee shops, and all-night studying sessions are common among proponents. Seasonal imagery of autumn is also common. Imagery of Gothic and collegiate Gothic architecture, candlelight, dark wooden furniture, and dense cluttered rooms often occurs. So far, with the Wikipedia goings on here, I think we are concentrated too heavily on the look of things, not the pursuit of things. But I think Wikipedia is not wrong here. I think that the practice of the dark academic has largely been superficial to this point. Not that there's not an undercurrent of the actual work going in here, but the subculture has been described as maximalist and nostalgic. This is going to be ironic later in the Wikipedia article. Universities that are often featured in dark academia image boards include the University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, and Harvard University. The subculture has similarities with goth subculture, tending to romanticize the findings of beauty in poetry and dark themes. Tim Brinkhoff of Big Think has stated that moody architecture and philosophical pessimism are key aspects of the aesthetic. I disagree slightly. Hannah Southwick of USA Today has described it as a melancholic and aesthetic. I almost said melancholic and aesthetic, but I think that is closer to the truth, citing fashion stylists who describe it as boarding school meets goth enthusiast. So far, neither boarding school nor goth are particularly pronounced in the things that I have seen. It is more a hearkening back to the 1930s, 1940s type aesthetic. History. The trend emerged on social media site Tumblr in 2015 as an aesthetic that captured the imaginations of a maturing Harry Potter generation. Harry Potter, one thing that I will say for the way that works into this is that I think that Harry Potter, the book series, I've never seen the movies, is close to a um, how can I say? I think that Gothic is in there, but I think that in the books you get more of a sense of Baroque from the architectures that are described. I think that Baroque would be uh, a meaningful infusion to the dark academic aesthetic. um, Harry Potter generation with various fandoms using the site to share dark Gothic revival interior and architectural photos. Dark academia rose in popularity during the COVID-19 pandemic. Increased interest in dark academia has been credited to the shutdown of schools. Is Shutdown of schools would be perhaps, in my opinion, counter to the way that this has worked. It is the cocooning of the individual in their own pursuits that is more influential. Works. The Gothic style Riggs Library at Georgetown University, a number of classical works such as Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray and Maurice by E.M. Forster, as well as works of writers such as Lord Byron and Percy Shelley, have been cited as either influential or popular among the subculture or fitting within the subculture's aesthetics. There are a few writers that I'm going to talk about later that I think fit just as well as these, if not better. Donna Tartt's novel, The Secret History, published in 1992, which tells the story of a murder that takes place within a group of classics students at a New England liberal arts college, has been credited as being the inspiration for the trend. Other more recent books, such as R.F. Kuang's novel Babel, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, If I Were Villains by M.L. Rio, Piranesi by Suzanne Clark, and Ninth House by Lee Bardugo have been included. A number of films and TV series have also been credited fitting the aesthetic. The 1989 film Dead Poet Society and the 2013 film Kill Your Darlings have in particularly been credited among the sources of inspiration for dark academia. Writing for Screen Rant, Kaylina Pierce Bowen has listed TV shows such as Aries, The Umbrella Academy, and A Series of Unfortunate Events, The Queen's Gambit, Wednesday, and The Magicians as among works that fit the aesthetics. Curated playlists inspired by dark academia have been published by outlets such as Van Magazine and Spotify. Such playlists focus on 19th and early 20th century Western classical music, with a particular emphasis on Romantic and Impressionist composers. Citing as the reception here, and I promise we're going to get past the article from, or the entry from Wikipedia, the Humanist Library of Celestat, France book riot writer Zoe Robertson stated that the subculture draws on seductive depictions of shadowy extravagance, a very beautiful phrase, and reminds her to see the rot in the foundations of an institution I can't stay away from and build my own school in defiance. Defiance is something that I think is underplayed in the understanding of dark academia, but it is among proponents one of the key hallmarks. One writer compares it to the contemporary cottagecore lifestyle aesthetic, saying that while cottagecore requires a home in the country and leisure time for crafting, dark academia's simple act of putting on a blazer and reading Dostoevsky is far more doable. That is insulting. Some commentators have attributed the rise in popularity of the subculture as a reaction to cuts of university funding and corporations of higher education. This is stupid. That is an idiotic attribution. What a moronic thing to say. Dark academia is not academia. It is not academia. Honi Soir, writer Ezra Norton stated that it reveals a deep disillusionment with education. Yes, education models that devalue knowledge unless it can be used to generate profit, that's questionable. And longing for a space to learn unencumbered by neoliberal agenda. Writing for Jacobin, Amelia Horgan argued that the trend was part of a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in students leaving campuses to learn in their family homes where many did not have access to adequate study space, providing a fantasy of university experience. That's interesting, which they were unable to obtain. However, she also noted that the world presented in the aesthetic was very different from that of the contemporary university, highlighting trends in UK academia as an example of the impacts of neoliberal policies on education, including long hours and the casualization for teaching staff and students to have to work multiple part-time jobs to cover their costs. I think that is, again, um, misfounded. I think that the hustle culture is much more closely akin to what it is that we're talking about with dark academia, because it is, in my opinion, a movement that is based largely on in addition to. The phrase in addition to. So you have your work life, you have the things you have to do, and in addition to that, you are studying, you are finding academic work. In part, in reaction to the growth of the subculture, the related light academia subculture has experienced a rise in popularity, often featuring lighter and softer imagery and colors and more overt emphasis on optimism. Gross. Now, I do want to note here that because something like dark academia is reaching an even tide of sort of popularity, and because the word academia is in the title, it is going to be subject to co opting. It is going to be subject to co opting by the establishments that consider themselves academic, by the establishments that have on their own no real finger on the pulse of culture, no real ability to create culture. So, some of these people that have been quoted already, you have to be sort of wary of things like that and where they are coming from. I want to note this as we head into the criticism section of the Wikipedia entry. Dark academia has been criticized for various reasons, including the aesthetic's perceived Eurocentrism, lack of diversity, and glamorization of unhealthy lifestyle choices. Critics have argued that the literary canon from which it draws inspiration is an overwhelmingly white one, with Tim Brinkoff claiming that content creators associated with dark academia prefer to discuss Oscar Wilde and Emily Dickinson over Toni Morrison or James Baldwin. Okay, so tell me why Toni Morrison and James Baldwin belong in something like a dark academic pursuit. Now, Oscar Wilde, I am neither here nor there on Oscar Wilde in general. I understand why the pieces would be discussed as dark academic. Emily Dickinson, personally, I have never seen described as dark academic. That's why we're going to get into Emily Dickinson later. But if you want to discuss Emily Dickinson in any literary pursuit, in any academic pursuit, you should be allowed to, because Emily Dickinson is, as I have proven for a decade on this channel, the single greatest poet of all time. So I think that it is incumbent upon someone making the anti-argument, like this Tim Brinkoff character, it is incumbent upon you to come with the reasons why. Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, great. Absolutely fine. If they fall into the confines of what it would mean to be dark academic. Put the actual argument down. And I don't I think that we are at a point in time where the sort of impetus is there to make anything seem ist or phobic. And I don't understand why that has to constantly be there. Sarah Burton, a sociologist from City University of London, noted that the aesthetic lacks representation of various groups, including most women, working class, people of color, plus sized individuals with low economic or cultural capital, disability, caring, and domestic activities and labor, especially the enjoyment of these, motherhood, queerness, and the everyday nature of academic life. I don't see where this is coming from. I really don't. In response to the aesthetic's lack of diversity, efforts have been made to incorporate literary works from black authors such as Langston Hughes into dark academia. I love Langston Hughes. I love Langston Hughes. I can see sort of melancholic through lines to Langston Hughes. I I don't know that that is really. I mean, I don't know that that's really there. I don't know that that's really there. The subculture has also been criticized as elitist, and so I think the question from the, viewing this would be, well, why talk about this? Because I think it's important. I think it's important because the naysayer approach to culture by what is essentially culture right now, the overwhelming want to strike something down and cast something out is absolutely mind blowing. And so the argument from, I can't remember who this was, Sarah Burton, about women in particular, I think is without merit. If there are, so I think that my argument at the end of this video will be about infusing these things in there, these two writers here, but I don't think that their omission from what is currently described here is on purpose. I don't think it is. I am going to make the argument for Emily Dickinson. I am going to make the argument for, frankly, the text of Frankenstein, but Mary Shelley largely. I don't think their omission largely in these conversations, in these circles, in these uh, ideas is nefarious. I think it just hasn't, because there's no greater example of dark academia than Emily Dickinson. There is no greater text that could be described as dark academic than Frankenstein. Oh, well, so why isn't this talked about? Doesn't matter. The idea, so this is not dark academia. Any of these movements, these are not something that belongs to a person, right? The idea belongs to everyone. It's like the death of the author, right? Once an author puts a poem out there, the poem does not belong to the author, it belongs to the reader. The idea of dark academia does not belong to whoever it was that first espoused the idea or the name dark academia. It belongs to everyone who considers themselves kind of dark and weird and academic. This cultural naysaying is toxic, if I can use a cultural naysayer's word, toxic, because it's saying you don't, this doesn't, it won't, instead of just making the argument for. If you, Sarah Burton, believe that certain things are lacked within a movement, be part of the movement and espouse them. Do not condemn the movement and naysay along the way, trying to make a name off of being the person who struck down something you don't understand. The subculture has also been criticized as elitist and an old money aesthetic. Who cares? The idea of old money is interesting, infinitely interesting to anyone who's willing to admit it. The big university, the Harvards of the world, William and Marys of the world. These are interesting settings because of the establishment to them. The, I think, undercurrent of something like dark academia is the want, the urge, the fantasy of building new establishment to out old establishment, the old establishment. The old establishment as it is now, the Harvards of the world, the Notre Dames of the world, have become wayward. They are no longer vestiges of truly academic, truly literary pursuits. So, in my opinion, what dark academia really means is it is a fantasy of returning the greatness of old to new. That doesn't necessarily make sense in the words, but I think you understand. The idea behind neoclassicism was to bring back things that the classics would approve of, but do it better. I think that's the same thing that dark academia really is. Drawing on the threefold typology of educational traditions outlined by Raymond Williams in his book, The Long Revolution, Amelia Horgan has described dark academia as being rooted in the attitudes of old humanists committed to preserving and sustaining a traditional and hierarchical culture while preserving the legacy of humanistic study. Amy Crawford of the University of Dundee has stated that the subculture tends to romanticize European upper class. Is that inherently evil? Like, what? Okay. Kevin N. Dalby of the University of Texas at Austin has stated that its association with higher learning and not Ivy League schools in particular creates elitism that does not enable just anyone to be a part of that group. Shut up. Shut up. Conversely, other commentators have noted that the fashion items associated with the trend are easily and cheaply sourced from thrift stores. That's not a criticism, you dolt. In fact, if it is a criticism, it is a criticism directly in the face of the idea of elitism. It is a criticism directly in the face of the idea that this does not include, I can't find it now, the working class. It's down here with this, with what it was that Sarah Burton had said. Anyway, just kind of breezing past all of this BS. Others have argued that the aesthetic places too much emphasis on the aesthetic of art and higher education instead of proper study and analysis of these works, leading to misinterpretations of source material. So, Harold Bloom. So, you want to talk about misinterpretation? Harold Bloom made the argument that, and you want to talk about elitism, Harold Bloom was the elitist of elitists. The elitist talked about the fact that perhaps misinterpretation is the basis of all creativity. So shove off with your BS. It's also to say that it is dismissive. It is reductivist to suggest that this entire movement is based on misinterpretations, and it is counter to, by the way, someone saying that it is elitist. So one of the things that is interesting about movements like this is that movements are often, I think, largely absent in the movement. I think that movements, basically the only one that I know of from a historical basis, an historical mount of people who are naming their own movement, it's the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. These were people who said, we are reclaiming what it means to be intellectual, right? And even then, at the time, there would have been arguments within the ranks of people who considered themselves Renaissance people, Enlightenments, or enlightened people. And a lot of the sort of naysaying around the edges of something like this are completely trivial to people who decide this is what they want to pursue. It has also faced criticism for potentially glamorizing unhealthy behaviors such as sleep deprivation, overworking, and substance misuse. Miss me with all of that. I'm not even going to get into it. So, see also, this is always something that is interesting to look at on Wikipedia. The see also portion of texts, um, it it warms my little heart to see hauntology on this list. Hauntology is another thing that I have long pursued on this channel. I didn't realize it because I'm getting very, very old, but I guess it's been around half a decade now that I've been talking about hauntology. So I do think that that is something very, very in tune with dark academia, hauntology, also work ethic. So here is where I am starting the original to me, or at least I believe, original to me portion of this video, attempting to sort of perhaps add to the movement, to create, if you will, culture. These are things that I am proposing and speculating on about dark academia that are interesting to the core of what I believe dark academia is. And here's something that is going to seem very, very opposite. Dada. The Dada movement, Dadaism, this is from Wikipedia, is an avant garde intellectual movement. It started around the time of the First World War, although not at first an art movement. It did influence art greatly for a time. I believe that dark academia is the same energy with Dadaism. I think that it is the same energy with the opposite ethos. Dadaism. So here's the big thing from Dada. Like if you Google Dada, probably you're going to get this picture come up. Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. This is not a urinal, right? So Dada, so see the date there, 1917. Dada was a movement that was sort of, in my opinion, about taking the pretensions off of things. It was about shaving pretentiousness off of things, which was ultimately a pretentious movement. The idea, avant garde idea to Dada, was that a lot of things took themselves too seriously. I think dark academia is partially a response to academia and the academic exclusion of people. We see the emergence of this, by the way, during the COVID-19 shutdowns, when people were shut out completely, definitionally shut out, definitionally cut off from academia. It is because of this that I think that the complete exclusion from academic pursuits is part of the underdog story of something like dark academia. Dark academia, really, you want to talk about the aesthetics of dark academia, or basically upper class. It is wearing the upper class as a skin suit. That's what dark academia is. Putting on the same clothes and saying, screw you. You don't get to cut me off of the parts that I want. This is a free world. I will dress like you. I will read the same texts as you. And I don't have the fancy teachers to tell me exactly what this book by Dostoevsky is about. I'm going to put some new criticism in it. That is what is underlying dark academia, not elitism. I think that this is also hand in hand with hustle culture. So it really did surprise me to see the criticism section of that Wikipedia entry, because I don't think it is ever explicitly mentioned in anywhere that you see dark academia talked about, etc., that the work ethic in there is extreme. It emphasizes, it promotes sleep deprivation, etc. Well, maybe you should be sleeping a little less. maybe you'd get more done. There's a famous quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger that um, everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. He said something like this: everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. And if you want to really accomplish things in your life, what you have is you have 8 hours that you have to work. And after that, you have 8 hours that you work. Most people have 8 hours that they sleep. Well, I say, Arnold said, I say, sleep a little bit faster, right? The real idea behind this is that so the original working day, I don't know if this is true. This is the myth behind why you work 8 hours a day. The 5-day, 8-hour work week is that there's 24 hours in a day. 8 hours you sleep, 8 hours you work, you have 8 hours to yourself. You have 8 hours for living. The idea behind sleeping less is you accomplish more. I think sort of the criticism section of this Wikipedia article was extremely frustrating, but I think fruitful because it is so individuals who are trying to tear this down are so inept that they'll talk themselves in circles and disprove their own arguments. There's no elitism in something like dark academia because dark academia is not the elites. The elites don't have to go the dark route. The elites don't have to hustle and grind. The hustle and grind culture portion of dark academia, even the Sigma Bro portion of dark academia, are so anti-elitist. Because the elites also, one of the things that is disgusting about the elites is they don't believe really in and the people making these criticisms don't realize they're the real elitists. The elites don't really depend on their own building of culture. The elitists depend on the other elites to say, yes, you are elite too. This is our culture, baby. That's not where hustle and grind culture come from. That's not where something like dark academia culture comes from. From none of that do these things spring. The idea behind dark academia is a reclamation of one's own education. It is an individualism. So I can't be bothered with all of the naysaying in today's culture. But hustle culture, this is the Jim Bro academic movement. That is what dark academia is. I mean, you don't have to be, let me clarify, as I put there, not all dark academics are Jim Bros, but all Jim Bros who are academic are dark academics. The same thing that leads someone to be a Jim Bro is the same thing alive in someone who considers themselves a dark academic. It doesn't mean you have to be a Jim Bro, but it is a recognition of the Jim Bro idea set in you to be able to dedicate yourself to something which is very difficult and not monetarily rewarding to consider yourself a dark academic. So I think that is something which is helpful to recognize in something like dark academia. Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is the ultimate blend of aesthetic and morbid presuppositions. Emily Dickinson's poetry is perhaps the pinnacle of dark and academic. Emily Dickinson, if you have the complete poems of Emily Dickinson, you can open it up to any two kissing pages in that book, and you'll find a word you don't know. Emily Dickinson was a master of ideas, a master of the morbid, a master of the maudlin, So I think, again, counter to the entry from Wikipedia that we saw, I haven't seen Emily Dickinson discussed as dark academic, but I think that Emily Dickinson would be the absolute ruler of the realm of the dark academe. Hannibal Lecter. Why I think Hannibal Lecter would be a very powerful symbol for dark academia is almost entirely for mimetic purposes. When you look at the Sigma male movement, which is a mimetic movement, which is a hustle and grind movement, they have Patrick Bateman as an avatar of Sigma. Adopting Lecter as an avatar would allow a definitive dichotomy from Sigma bro culture, with the avatar of Patrick Bateman. Though the two exhibited similar actions, right? Hannibal Lecter was a cannibal, and Patrick Bateman was a serial murderer. Lecter was the consummate intellectual versus Bateman, the money chaser. Bateman was more Sigma because he was ultimately concerned with what it was that he wanted to do, and this was not something that was generally accepted by society. Both of those things are very Sigma. You abide by your own set of rules, and those rules could care less about finding a group that appreciates them. So Bateman, in a weird sort of way, really falls into those two things. Lecter was the consummate intellectual, and was so much so that even in the depths so one of the things, if you watch the Silence of the Lambs, the first time that Starling goes to visit Lecter, count the doors she goes through. She goes through 7 doors, or 6 doors, and then Lecter is behind the 7th, right? This is to be emblematic of the 7 layers of hell. Lecter, even from those depths, could remember poetry, could cite books, could talk about things that he had done in his professional pursuits years before, was an artist, made all those drawings that were hanging in his cell. He was an intellectual. I think that Lecter would be a very powerful mimetic tool for the dark academic movement. Now, perhaps Oscar Wilde has some texts to offer as far as the reading list for a dark academic, but I believe there is nothing more fitting than Frankenstein. This is perhaps the ultimate in dark academic texts. What does it represent? What does it show? The unbridled pursuit of academic excellence, and discovery leads to something very dark and very morbid. The core pursuit at the center of the Frankenstein text is pure academia, and then what happens when you find it? And it's I've got a read along on the channel, read along playlist for the text that I'm still in the middle of. And one of the comparisons that I've made is the comparison between Frankenstein's monster and the atom bomb, right? These things are very comparable because once you have them, you can't go back. That is, in my opinion, part of dark academia. It is part of what it means to shut yourself off from the world and try to reinvent yourself, which is, I think, at the heart of dark academia. So, going back to that very introductory statement that I made in this video, that there is a danger to dark academia, which is the fact that you get addicted to the lifestyle, which is the fact that you close yourself off from the world and you become so different, you can't go back. I think that that is a dark fantasy of this movement, becoming so different from who it is that you used to be that there's no going back. Frankenstein represents that. In some ways, when you read the text, what you can read into it is that Frankenstein went off to college, dedicated himself to knowledge, was so dedicated to knowledge that he began the ability to create. The moment he created the monster, can it not be interpreted that Frankenstein lived through the monster? The monster became what Frankenstein was, morphed into the monster. At the very least, the moment he creates that life, he is both Frankenstein and the monster. And there's also the idea that we talked about earlier where a movement happens, a poem is written, and you no longer own it. Frankenstein created the monster and he did not own it. But in the same way that an artist creates a piece and doesn't own it, it is still referred to as the artists. So Emily Dickinson wrote this poem. She does not control what I get from the poem, but I still refer to it as an Emily Dickinson poem. Frankenstein's monster was out there running around, still being referred to, and we still refer to it as Frankenstein's monster. So I think that it is an extremely useful text for something like dark academia. Now, I talked earlier also about the fact that Wikipedia is, as a source, kind of bastardized. Maybe, in my own experience, exemplified best by Joseph Campbell, which seems a nonsensical statement at the outset, and something for which I was not prepared when I started preparing for this video. Joseph Campbell, and look, maybe I've done something wrong, maybe I just couldn't find it, maybe I can't believe what I just went through on Wikipedia. Formative in my own academic pursuits was a Wikipedia entry on Joseph Campbell. So I hate to make anything too much about myself, but I have to tell this story. I was not supposed to go to college. The place where I come from, I wasn't supposed to be in college. And I knew that I wanted to go to college from a very young age. It was something very important to me. I love learning things. And I had to go to community college first. That's where I got an associate's degree from community college. It took me 5 years to get through a 2-year degree, having to bit and piece it through with working full-time, working 2 jobs, at times working 3 jobs, etc. Eventually, I was able to afford to send myself to college. Moved up to St. Joseph, Missouri Western State University, a directional school in Missouri. And not the rock star of colleges, but I had access at that point. And during the summer months, the moment the library was open during the summer months, I would be up there for hours. And kind of aimless, right? Just what can I learn today? What can I read about today? What can I search up? What spirits can I gin up in the academic pursuits today? One of them, I decided to start clicking around on the computers and learning about Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces, the hero myth, the hero's journey. I found an article about Joseph Campbell and how he broke up his day. And it was so Joseph Campbell, and we'll get into a little bit here. Um, I got some sourcing from ChatGPT. Joseph Campbell was kind of the same way. Not as me, but I found inspiration in it, right? That he was at one point sort of aimless, but he knew he wanted to do something. So he broke up his day into shifts and completely transformed himself. This is a dark academic ideal. Cocooned himself and reemerged into the world. But also, I think a core tenet to the dark academic idea, the diagnosis and explanation of all storytelling with the hero's journey. He looked at everything and said, oh, no, that's all the same. I mean, the dark academic ideal, I don't think anything could be more dark academic ideal besides creation and generation than diagnosis of something which explains everything, right? To say your entire establishment right here in this little hole that I have dug for it. A very dark academic quote from Joseph Campbell. I think the person who takes a job in order to live, that is to say, for the money, has turned himself into a slave. Right at the heart of dark academia. But Joseph Campbell was the ultimate hustle bro as he rose to intellectual prominence. And ironically here, I forgot I didn't finish that. I went to search up Joseph Campbell on Wikipedia. He used to have a very long bio on Wikipedia. Maybe I'm missing it. Maybe I've done something wrong here. I could no longer find it. There is a very short blurb on Joseph Campbell. There is no blurb that I could find on the hero's myth, on the hero's journey, on the hero with 1,000 faces. There used to be huge entries on Wikipedia about that. Massive entries on Wikipedia about that. Pages long entries on Joseph Campbell on Wikipedia. Again, perhaps I am to blame. I couldn't find any of it. Wikipedia is gone. It is overtaken. And it is very surprising to me that someone like Joseph Campbell has been sort of relegated to the non-persona grata or the persona non grata of the current sort of whatever it is that is imbuing popular culture, with the naysaying culture as the naysaying culture. For Joseph Campbell to be canceled. Anyway, I got this from ChatGPT. Joseph Campbell. So I prompted, how did Joseph Campbell used to break up his day? Because it's very, very, very grind culture, hustle bro mentality. Joseph Campbell, renowned for his work on mythology and the concept of the hero's journey, maintained a disciplined daily routine during a pivotal period in his life. In the early 1930s, amidst the Great Depression, so how much more into a cocoon can you really get? Campbell retreated to a rented shack in Woodstock, New York, dedicating himself to intensive self-study. He structured his day into 4-hour blocks. So that's just the sourcing there. So maybe it's still on Wikipedia. 3 blocks of 12 hours, focused on reading and study. 1 block, 4 hours, reserved for personal time, which could include leisure or social activities. Campbell would rise at 8 a.m., spend the first hour on morning routines, and then engage in 3 hours of reading. After an hour-long lunch break, he would resume reading for another 3 hours. The evening block was flexible. If he had social engagements, he would allocate time accordingly, ensuring that he still completed his reading goals. His rigorous schedule allowed Campbell to immerse himself deeply in a wide range of literature, laying the foundation for his later works. He emphasized the importance of reading what genuinely interests you, suggesting that following one's passion leads to a more profound and self-directed education. Campbell's approach underscores the value of structured self-discipline. Anyway, as I recall it, he would, I think this is different than what I remembered. He would read for 4 hours, then he would write for 4 hours. Then he would read for 4 hours, then he would write for 4 hours. That was his daily routine. That is dark academic to the core. I also think that Carl Jung would be very, very important for the dark academic movement. I have not seen, I imagine somewhere, some corner of dark academia, Carl Jung has to be represented. Not to my experience. I think that Carl Jung is sort of tangentially, however, associated with dark academia already. But Jung, and especially the Red Book, could prove a pivotal hallmark in the movement. So I'm going to read you another excerpt from ChatGPT, but I want to give you my understanding of what is going on here first. It is my understanding that what Carl Jung basically did, you know how if you're having a good day, you just go with it, right? I'm having a good day. I feel good. I don't know why, but today nothing's going to bother me. It was his experience that people do that. And it was his experience that when people feel a depression coming on, they try to fight that off as if it were the flu. They try to fight that off. But Carl Jung got curious. And he said, is that the right thing to do? Carl Jung, feeling a depression coming on, and I think anyone who's been in that place, you understand what that means. I don't think that it's something you can particularly put into words, but you understand that feeling of darkness brewing. Got into that place and said, well, I'm going to go with it. What do you mean you're going to go with it? The same way that you go with a good day. He felt it coming on and said, well, we'll see where it goes. We'll see where this leads. We'll see how deep this hole is. And it was during that experience that he went some weird places. And from that experience, the Red Book was created. So this is an excerpt from ChatGPT when I prompted about that. Carl Jung's descent into depression and visionary experience, culminating in his creation of the Red Book, also called Liber Novus, is one of the most dramatic and mysterious episodes in modern intellectual history. One of the most dramatic and mysterious episodes in modern intellectual history. What could be more dark academia than that? It is a story of psychic disintegration, creative rebirth, and radical self-exploration. What Jung himself would later describe as his confrontation with the unconscious. Context: the crisis begins 1913. Around 1913, Jung was at the height of his academic and professional success. 1913, very close in time period with the Dada movement. But internally, he was breaking apart. He had split with Freud, severing a deeply emotional and intellectual bond. He began experiencing violent visions and waking fantasies of floods, deaths, and destructions months before World War I broke out. He feared he was going insane, but realized it was not psychosis, but a psychic initiation of sorts. What could be more dark academic than this? The Red Book, Liber Novus. During this period, roughly 1913 to 1916, with revisions into the 1920s, Jung began recording his inner experiences in a series of notebooks, which he eventually copied and illuminated by hand in what became the Red Book. It is part mythology, part psychological document, part spiritual epic, a personal scripture in the tradition of Dante, Blake, and Nietzsche. So Nietzsche, I don't mention Nietzsche or Blake here because in my experience, those are very, very closely associated. They are very, very closely associated with dark academia. Key features of the Red Book. Active imagination. Jung entered a deliberate trance-like state engaging with autonomous figures from his unconscious. Visionary narratives. He journeyed through mythic landscapes, met symbolic characters, and faced archetypal conflicts, death, madness, and rebirth. psychological philosophy. The text anticipates many of his later ideas: individuation, the shadow, anima, animus, archetypes, and the self. Individuation, I think, is a very key tenet to Dark Academia. Art and calligraphy. He painted mandalas, spirits, flames, and dreamlike landscapes, making it as much a sacred object as a written book. Was Jung depressed? Yes, but not in a clinical sense. He referred to it as his creative illness, a phrase sometimes used for the periods of existential crisis that can precede a psychological or spiritual transformation. Periods of existential crisis, which are psychological and spiritual transformation. That is the dark academic ideal. The years when I pursued the inner images were the most important in my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. That is a quote from Jung. Outcome: a new psychology. Jung didn't collapse. He emerged from this period with the foundations for analytical psychology, including the collective unconscious, the process of individuation, shadow integration, the centrality of myth and symbol in psychic life. The Red Book was hidden until 2009. What a mythology for something like Dark Academia. Jung considered it too personal, too strange, and feared it would damage his reputation. Again, what a legacy for Dark Academia. After his death in 1961, the family kept it unpublished and locked away for decades. It was finally released in 2009, and scholars were stunned by its depth, beauty, and strangeness. So this is also something from ChatGPT that it will do once in a while. Talking points for a hook. Carl Jung didn't write the Red Book as a scientist. He wrote it as a man trying to survive himself. It's not just the story of a breakdown. It's the story of a man who stared into the mythic unconscious and came back with maps. What a great quote from an artificial intelligence. Another person that I think could be key to the dark academic movement, Caravaggio. This is his San Girolamo. The dark academic aesthetic is just alive and thriving inside of Caravaggio's paintings. But also, two things that are, I think, would be infinitely, three things that would be infinitely intriguing to someone who considers themselves a dark academic ones. Caravaggio killed a man over a game of tennis. Because of a game of tennis. Two, Caravaggio was so good that very important religious figures kept saving his skin. There were several times where Caravaggio was in the most serious of trouble, and the Pope said, I believe a Pope directly saved Caravaggio. If memory serves me correctly, I should have looked into this before the video. A Pope saved Caravaggio personally on multiple occasions. But nonetheless, maybe it wasn't the Pope. Maybe it wasn't a Pope. Maybe it was a de Medici. On several occasions, because Caravaggio was so talented, was so good at what he did, was saved from what should have been sure death. Number three, I think at the core of dark academia is a little bit of heresy, a little bit of being willing to dance on the grave of something held sacred. A story that I believe has never been confirmed about Caravaggio, but maybe it has been. Anyway, doesn't matter. In the myth of Caravaggio is a tale of Caravaggio painting Mother Mary, one of his paintings of Mother Mary. I believe it was his painting The Assumption, where Mary never died. She was assumed whole piece into heaven. There was a famous prostitute in Italy who either drowned or was drowned and washed up on the shore. The tale goes that for his painting, Caravaggio used that prostitute's dead body to represent the Mother Mary. Now boy, that's dark. But this Saint Girolamo there, another person who I think could be very symbolic to the dark academic movement is Saint Jerome. So, Saint Jerome, this is Leonardo's Saint Jerome. Dark academia is known for the aesthetics, but I think for people practicing dark academia, it is known for the ascetics. Aesthetics are looks. Ascetics are the torture of the body for the good of the soul. Saint Jerome was known as someone, so you can't see it in this portion of the painting, but over here, Saint Jerome is holding in his hand a rock. This is an unfinished painting by Leonardo. What else is new? What Saint Jerome would do is retreat to the desert and beat himself in the chest while reciting prayers, while praying, while indulging in the profound, indulging in the spiritual. This, beating himself in the chest with a rock, was the torture of the body while praying for the good of the soul. That, I think, is a very dark academic idea. If there were one criticism that I would offer towards something like dark academia, it would be, at least from the periphery that I have of things, the view that I have of things, more ascetic, less aesthetic. The movement is largely made out to be about fashion, about interior design, and I think that about music playlists on YouTube. And I think that element is there for sure, but I think that it is. I think that part of the downfall of, or part of the failure of comeuppance for a movement like dark academia to this point, right? There's no flag wavers of dark academia. There's no new creators of the art of dark academia. Is that it is, at this point, in my opinion, too aesthetic, too little ascetic. And I think that part of that is because it is an anti-gatekeeper type of ethos. It is a counterculture type of movement. And I think that is probably years off from a card-carrying status as far as what a movement is. And I think that's normal. I think that that is not at all to downplay what it is to be a dark academic, but I think that the threat is there that flip doesn't switch, right? So another person, simply for mimetic ideals, Sting, the WCW wrestler Sting. Why? Well, first off, hustle bros, gym culture bros, Sigma bros of my age will all recognize Sting. That makes him very useful in mimetic culture. But here's the thing. Sting represents very, very largely the idea that I discussed at the beginning of this, which is to sort of remove yourself from the world and reinvent yourself, and the danger there is that you go too far. Sting, his wrestling name is Sting, but his nickname in wrestling culture, his nickname in the WCW was the Franchise. Sting was WCW wrestling in the early 90s. In the late 90s, in the late 80s, I believe as far back as the late 80s, was colorful, was flamboyant, was the good guy. I mean, the alpha, the good guy, became a Sigma. And what happened there was he was the Franchise. He was WCW. He was World Championship Wrestling as World Championship Wrestling was known. Very loud, very colorful, very flamboyant. A group of wrestlers that would become known as the NWO, the New World Order, came into WCW. They were the new big bad guys. Sting, his storyline at the time, and I know this is going to seem very, very esoteric and very nonsensical, but follow along, please. His storyline at the time was that he felt he was backstabbed by the other WCW tried and trues, the Blue Bloods, right? If Dark Academia is to be counterculture, if Dark Academia is to be counter-establishment, if Dark Academia is to be wearing the Ivy League schools as a skin suit, this makes sense. Sting, the big bad guy NWO came in, and Sting disappeared. The Franchise, the good guy, the alpha, disappeared. He was very flamboyant, very colorful, had face paint like this, right here, and it was always yellow and blue and red. He would wear pink and yellow and all of these bright colors. He disappeared, went away. When he re-emerged, when he came back, he looked like this. This is dark. This is darkness, right? He was a Crow, the Crow type character. And when he came back, he was again the good guy, but as opposed to an alpha, he was a Sigma. As opposed to the Franchise, he was an outsider. He did not claim to be WCW anymore. He was the most popular guy in the WCW. You can find these masks at every five and dime, every sort of garage sale still today. This is 20 years ago, 25 years ago. God, I'm old. He came back and he was an outsider living by his own rules. He was an anti-hero. Not an alpha, a Sigma. Not the Franchise, but Sting. They didn't call him the Franchise anymore, at least to the best of my memory. This is what Dark Academia is. You were an academic. The Ivy League colleges did not want you. You went dark. You pursued your own studies. And when you came back, you were not a hero, you were an anti-hero. Sting would go on to wrestle for 20 more years. He just recently retired for good, at least as far as we know. Maybe he'll come back. He never went back to the colorful Sting. He was some iteration of the Crow Sting for the rest of his career. It was a complete transformation. The next text, quote unquote, to put on this list is Limitless, a movie from 2011. In this movie, I love this movie. I don't know why I love this movie. Bradley Cooper's character has gone dark in his own life. He is a writer, and he has failed. He's fallen off, and he finds a miracle drug. Remember what we talked about at the end of that criticism of the movement of dark academia. And by the way, they didn't have nicotine on that list of substances. I think they should have. Nicotine, I think, is very, very zen, very, very big in this movement. But in that movie, Bradley Cooper's character finds this miracle drug and it lights his intellectual pursuits on fire. He completely transforms himself. That is, I think, very deeply in this type of culture. And then Fight Club. Finally, Fight Club. This story is at heart an exploration of the speaker's shadow. Spoilers. This is a text that is easily interpreted as a Sigma movement, and I think that's in there. But the emergence of Durden's philosophy also screams of a dark academic interpretation. So I think that there is room in Fight Club to be made an interpretation for the dark academia. Anyways, guys, that is what I have for this video, sort of an entry into what, at least as far as I understand, the dark academic movement. And I think it marks this video, as this is such a burden off of my back, will mark something of a transformation of content on this channel. You've seen me in the past few years make the darkest detail sort of videos on this channel. That's something I really want to pursue. And I think that the dark academia sort of subject matter allows me an entry point into that. So I am still on the hustle culture grind of daily videos I've done for over 2 years now. And I think that I do want to take a tilt towards stuff more like this, but that's what I have here. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on the channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.